What about if you have a job you don't like?
Well, ideally, quit it. So March 31st is International Quit Your Crappy Job Day.
How great
right?
is that? This is a real thing, isn't it? I thought you'd made it up, but it's a real thing.
So 49% of people in the UK have quit their job because of a bad boss.
This is all about happiness in the workplace or happiness out of the workplace, but via your work. So what are a lot of countries getting wrong? What is Scandinavia getting right? And give us the headlines of our route map from one to the other.
Right. So I think I've written 5 or 6 books now.
Yeah.
And I think this one might be the most important one because we spend a third of our lives at work.
Yeah.
And when you ask people, how did you feel or what did you do yesterday and how did that make you feel? Yeah. Being with friends, having fun, top of the list. Bottom 3, driving to work, being at work, driving home from work. So the book is trying to change that because we all work and all jobs have good and bad sides, but we can all do a little bit better. So I've tried to install a lot of tips, sort of a menu of ideas you can implement at work, both in and outside work. So if we start outside work, we all have chores that we need to do at home, some bigger projects. And one of my friends, Ida, has found this great way of making those sort of bigger projects at home more enjoyable. So she has a small homestead. And her family, together with 2 other families, they come together 3 weekends per year. So my friend will have the 2 other families come and they'll spend the weekend building a chicken coop or a pizza oven or a new deck for the terrace. And then the 2 other weekends, she goes to other families. They take care of the food. The kids play together. They have a lot of fun and they get that done. So I think that's an easy hack we can all implement in our lives. But I've looked at which companies are great at having jobs that are more enjoyable. And for instance, if we look in Copenhagen, we have a 200-year-old amusement park called the Tivoli Gardens. They have a policy called the 3-meter rule, which means that everything within your 3-meter radius, that's your responsibility. So you're the CEO of those 3 meters. So if you're the vice president and you see trash within your 3 meters, you pick that up. So it's a great sense of sort of autonomy. Everybody has a responsibility. If you see guests that are sort of, looking around the park, can't find their way, you help them out. Compare that to an experience I had at a hotel in Atlanta a few years ago, where I check out and the man at the reception say, I hope you enjoyed your stay with us, Mr. Wiking. I really hope you will consider visiting us again if you visit Atlanta, Mr. Wiking. So he was instructed on what to say. Completely micromanage. So if you give people autonomy, if you give them freedom, if you give them the responsibility, they become much more happy at work. So a lot of sort of different policies can impact how people feel at work.
What about if you have a job you don't like?
Well, ideally, quit it. So March 31st is International Quit Your Crappy Job Day.
How great
right?
is that? This is a real thing, isn't it? I thought you'd made it up, but it's a real thing.
So 49% of people in the UK have quit their job because of a bad boss. I don't live in the UK, but I would be one of those 49%.
Yeah, you tell your story in the book.
So one of my first sort of real job, I worked as a baker night shifts. I've sold Christmas trees. I worked in a cafe.
Cinnamon swirls?
Cinnamon swirls, yes. thousands. So 45% of the Danish GDP is cinnamon swirls.
That's why you're so happy all the time.
Out of college, my first job was the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I show up for work the first day. I meet my new boss. He says, "So you are the new guy. What languages do you speak?" And I say English, and then I say Sønderjysk, which is the distinct dialect of Danish, where I grew up in Denmark. I thought that was a funny joke. He said, "You don't speak French, then what the hell are you doing here?" And then he walked off. So I lasted there for about 10 months, and then the next job I had an amazing boss who could see my potential and who was really good at coaching me. I spent 7 years at that company. So we all experience bad bosses. In the book, I go into the red flags, how you can spot a toxic boss. If you have one now, you need to save up. I know a lot of people are struggling financially and trying to make ends meet, but having a freedom fund that allows you to say no to a toxic boss or walk away from a toxic job, tremendously important.
Yeah.
So bring your lunch to work. So, so it was also when I set up the Happiness Research Institute, it was back in 2012. I was working late in the office, and suddenly I read that the UN had just published the World Happiness Report. I thought, that's an interesting report. And there was a ranking over happiness levels around the world. Denmark was in first place. And I thought, why is that? And it's often that I saw livability, quality of life rankings, happiness rankings, and Denmark and the other Nordic countries were doing quite well in those. And I thought, somebody should look into that. Somebody should create a think tank on happiness in Denmark. And then I thought, maybe I should do that. And I'm a simple guy. I live a relatively frugal life. I'm not into cars, Chris. I'm sorry.
You know, you really don't have to be. It shouldn't be called car anymore, but it is. All right.
I'm into bikes. So I mean, I had savings that would sustain me for 2 years. Yeah. So I could venture into this.
And that's enough, isn't it?
Trying to set something out that turned out to be the best decision that I made in my career. Yeah,
because it sounds like a mythical creation, the Happiness Institute, but it's a real place, isn't it? How does it live and breathe at the moment?
Well, we're a research institute, and basically all the work we do, all the projects, my career is dedicated to 3 questions. How do we measure happiness? Why are some people happier than others? And how do we improve quality of life? And work is a big part of that,
of course it is.
Right?
It's
because
massive.
we spend a huge amount of time at work. We can also see from the studies we've done, if we manage to improve our work satisfaction with 1 point, say on a scale from 0 to 10, you actually improve your life satisfaction with half a point. So it's not a silo. Of course, it overspills. If you are sad at work, you bring that home.
Yeah.
So another thing from the book, and that's actually borrowing from something we have at the Happiness Museum. We also created a Happiness Museum a few years ago in Copenhagen. And my favorite room in the museum is a room where we have asked people to write down on Post-its what happiness is to them.
Wow.
And there's a lot of pizzas and burgers and drinks and partying and dances and Rihanna and food and relationships. But somebody wrote, happiness is a quality lawnmower and a big lawn to mow. Right? Because it's a sense of progress. So in the book, I talk about the progress principle. We like to see progress.
Yeah, so important.
So, for instance, when I write books, I know they have to be around 40,000 words. Each day I count. So how did you march towards that goal today, right? So little hacks like that will help you. So I had a conversation with Camelot. I think that's the national lottery you have here in the UK, about big ticket winners a couple of years ago. And there's this anecdotal story of one guy. I think he used to work at nights in a dog food factory of all places, and he wasn't used to seeing the sun for years. Then he won. It must have been £1 million or more. Quit his job and bought a lawnmower he can sit on.
Yeah.
And now he mows lawns, not for a living, but because he enjoys it. We can also see, and I think that's super interesting to see, that the FIRE movement that is spreading. Financial independence, retire early, people who save a lot, invest, and then live off the dividends.
Yeah.
They don't quit work. They continue to work, but as they say, work is much more enjoyable when you don't need the money. I think work is essential. We get relationships through work. We get a sense of purpose. We get structure to our days. There's a lot of benefits from work. We get our identity. When you sit down at dinner, talk with new people, one of the first questions is, so what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? So it's tremendously important to our well-being. We need work, but we need also to make workplaces better than they are today.
The 25 most fulfilling jobs, and it's no coincidence that they're all in service of others, or is it?
Right. And we can see having a sense of purpose and meaning at work tremendously important. Perhaps one of the most important factors when people say whether they're happy with their jobs or not. And I think a technique like job crafting can be a hack here. So a research study was done around hospital cleaners in the UA. I think it was a Yale study. And they looked at why are some of these hospital cleaners happier with their jobs than others. And those that saw themselves solely as cleaners were less satisfied than those that also incorporated elements in their daily routine that perhaps were not part of the official job description. So one guy, for instance, he saw it as his core function to make people laugh. So he was literally cleaning up vomit from the floor. He was working in a chemotherapy ward. And he said, my job here is to make people laugh. So if people were throwing up on the floor, feeling bad about it, he would say, no. Please continue. That's how I get paid. If you can do a little bit more, get off the bed and go it over there. Maybe I can get some overtime. He was much more happier. I think I actually stumbled upon job crafting a few years ago. I sold Christmas trees for about 7 years in December. Pro tip, very good month for selling Christmas trees. So it's a tough job. It's outside in December. It's dark. It's cold. You work with an axe. You hit yourself over the finger. But it's also a job where you can exercise a little bit of Robin Hood activity because if a single parent comes up and are very price conscious about the trees, you can give them a different price compared to the guys to the guy who rolls up in a Mercedes, points out a tree and asks you to put it in the trunk. He will get a different price. But it's also a job where you can sort of you can be the guy that drizzles a little bit of magic on a family's Christmas, right? So you would make arrangements with grandmothers, learning the names of the grandkids that would come the next day and say, listen, guys, I have actually reserved a magical special Christmas tree for Alex and Alexandra. What are your names? My names are Alex and Alexandra. Oh, my God. So that would be the fun part of that work, right? So it's job crafting.
Arbeitsglätter.
That's pretty good, Chris. Have you done Danish on Duolingo?
No, but I'm tempted. I either want to move to California or to Denmark, and I don't really mind which. Let's just toss a coin. By the way, I'm really happy where I am as well. What is Arbeitsglätter?
So Arbeitsglätter is a compound word. It's a word. It's happiness at work. So right. Arbeit means work. Glæde is joy. So Danes have some of the highest job satisfaction levels in Europe. 2 out of 3 Danes report really high job satisfaction levels. Almost 60% of Danes say they would continue to work even if they won the big ticket in the lottery.
Do you have the lottery? Do you bother in Scandinavia? You're also darn happy. Do you actually need a lottery?
There is a lottery. I don't play it.
Or is it Scandi-wide, or is it Denmark and...
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, sorry. I interrupted you. Please continue.
But yeah, so it's expected that work should actually be a source of happiness. And Danes, I think, also perhaps are better at quitting if their jobs are not bad. We work on average fewer years in the same job compared to Germans, the Brits, Finns, and so on. I think Germans work on average 10 years, Italians 12 years, the French 11 years, Danes work 7 years on average. And here is also, of course, also a question of what policies are in place. Because if you lose your job or are unemployed in Denmark, there are great social security benefits. So for 2 years, you get quite good benefits, and of course that gives you sort of financial security to actually have the courage to quit your job that I know a lot of countries don't have.
And this was an experiment, wasn't it, that they ran? And it's called basic minimum income, or
so Finland has run an experiment on universal basic income.
Yeah.
So with very good results in terms of stress, in terms of happiness. But here in the UK, you have also run an interesting experiment on the 4-day work week, and I know a second experiment is coming out now, and I think the companies that were part of that experiment, I think 92% of those companies continued with the 4-day work week after the experiment ended, experienced better staff retention, lower stress levels, a little bit better profitability as well. So I think there's a lot of great benefits in looking at new ways of organizing work.
Okay, now the sort of antithesis of Arbeitsglätter is it Karashi?
Karoshi.
Karoshi.
Yeah, so it's a Japanese word that means death by overwork, which is a phenomenon in Japan. They've tried to cater it. Some companies now turn off the light in the office building at 10 o'clock to stop people from working there. But it's not just a Japanese phenomenon. The WHO, so the World Health Organization, believes that 750,000 deaths per year are due to people working too long hours, so more than 55 hours per week. So we all work. A lot of us are fortunate enough to work. It's important for our well-being, but it can also be too much.
Why do you think it is, if you go upstream from where we are today, why is it that Scandinavia seems to have a better take on this than anywhere else in the world? When did that happen? What was the tipping point? Because I live in a place called Marlow, and we are just downstream from a place called Danesfield. And Danesfield is called Danesfield because the Danes used to come and rape and pillage.
Sorry about that.
No,
we were going through a phase.
But what I'm saying is, how do you get from that to where you are now, scoring consistently, being in the top 5 in the happiness stakes? What happened?
Well, I think so. If we take the Viking age, one of the things the Vikings actually had to do quite well was cooperate and work together as a band. It also gave the women a lot of power and responsibility, because when the men were out pillaging, the women ran the household and the villages.
Right.
So perhaps we had an advance in terms of equality. We can also see the Nordic countries are among the most equal, gender-wise. Collective responsibility, and also seeing that the tribe and our collective quality of life as my responsibility.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, obviously you're right. I'm sorry about this. I didn't mean to patronise, but if you think about, when I think about Scandinavia, if I think about it a bit longer, it's a much more maternal, parental,
right.
Based valued philosophy, because it is about the family, it is about children, it is about being human first.
Right.
It's less about going out there and proving yourself, isn't it? It's about, you don't need to, because we will make you feel so loved. You will know that anyway, and you will take that with you as your super fuel into your adulthood. You don't have to earn it, you don't have to prove it. You have got it because we have given it to you.
Right. And there's a lot of focus on the work-life balance, and that's also a chapter in the book, how we can sort of create that better work-life balance.
You talk about that as a myth, don't you?
Right, but it's not so. I think the productivity is probably the same, but condensed in Denmark. So, if you have a parent on your team, you don't schedule a meeting after 4:00 because people are expected to leave.
Brilliant.
Picking up the kids, and you also try to create a culture where it's not expected of people to work outside office hours.
Yeah, in many ways, you're frowned upon for staying at work as opposed to leaving to go home. The opposite here.
Right. So you can create a culture around that. So having a email signature saying, "Listen, I work on flexible hours and outside normal working office hours. I don't expect you to respond to my email outside yours."
Yeah.
So little things like that. But I think it's also a culture where we try to. There's a lot of focus on we and your success, not just my success.
Yeah. And also, in many sort of cultures, work needs a sort of rebranding exercise, doesn't it? Because, you can work hard, but then there's hard work. But hard seems to now be sort of ingrained in the word work regardless.
Right.
And it should be something that we all, a job or an occupation or a vocation or a direction when we're scholars, when we're like teenagers and a bit older in higher education, should be a destination where we want to go.
Right.
And then, somewhere, overnight almost seemingly, it's turned into something that's hard, doesn't pay enough money, and causes far more disruption and disability than all the well-being that we hoped it would.
Exactly. And I think that the foundation that this book rests on is the idea that work can and should be a source of happiness if we design it right.
Yeah.